Thanks, Amita. My proposal is that we will, I think, take all the issues on board together, including what might come from the audience. And then, Asim, you and I can probably just share a few thoughts at the end. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay. I'd like to invite Mr. Ramaswamy Iyer. Mr. Iyer is well known as the former secretary in the Water Resources Ministry. But even when he was secretary in the Water Resources Ministry, I think he was more of a NGO activist than a bureaucrat, in the typical sense of the word at first. And since then, since retiring, he's been a very, very active supporter of the various movements, especially against the kind of madness that is taking place on with regard to big dams and the linking of rivers and so on and so forth. So, Mr. Iyer, your thoughts, please.
I am happy and proud to be associated with this function to launch an extremely important book and consider it a privilege to be a panelist on this occasion. May I begin on a personal note? As I started reading the book under discussion, I was struck by the strong resonance between what I was reading and what I had tried to say in a slim book published 5 years ago called Towards Water Wisdom, Limits, Justice, Harmony. I am encouraged and gratified to find my plea for limits, justice and harmony corroborated by this monumental research-based book. Those 3 words are central to this book too. There are multiple strands in the book: injustice and cruelty to fellow human beings and other forms of life, an absence of compassion, indifference to future generations, destructive rapacity towards nature, and utter unconcern for the survival of planet Earth. The book talks about all these, but it also covers other important themes. It's a powerful indictment of the processes of development and globalization which, in the guise of economic reform, have been presented to developing countries as the only way forward and imposed by the international financial institutions through their conditionalities with the active collaboration of the national elites. The book points out that what might have seemed superficially to be an ideological movement from socialism to capitalism, that is itself a questionable thesis, but it has in fact been taken over by the giant transnational corporations to further their own aggrandizement. It argues that the potential for harm inherent in the dominant ideology is compounded and aggravated by the hegemony of giant transnational corporations. It draws attention to the fact that the processes of globalization have undermined the sovereignty of national governments, subverted and perverted their policies and decision making, and enabled a very small number of people to become incredibly rich at the cost of impoverishing and imbecilizing millions. Development in commerce, so pursued, has been inimical to agriculture, destroyed livelihoods, and eroded traditional arts and crafts and ways of living. It has also inflicted grave damage on the environment and ecology and endangered the future of humanity and planet Earth itself. As an exposition and criticism of all that has gone wrong, the book is powerful enough. But it goes beyond that. It expresses the profound conviction that another world is possible and must be brought about. Bringing together ecological concerns, anguish at pervasive and deepening iniquity and injustice, indignation at the horrendous power acquired by the corporates, and the corresponding weakening of the state and society, and dismay at the increasing autonomy and cancerous growth of the world of finance and the subordination of the real economy to it, the authors make a fervent plea and passionate plea for radical change. Part 2 of the book, titled Dawn, There is an Alternative, to which they have given the name Radical Ecological Democracy. They say that they are not offering a blueprint, but the broad picture they present is fairly comprehensive and detailed. There could be difference of views on some of the elements in that total picture, the steps by which that alternative vision is to be realized, and the extent to which the radical transformation proposed by the authors can be actually achieved. But they leave us in no doubt that radical change is needed, and it seems to me, speaking personally, that the directions of change outlined by them are the right ones. The themes and theses of the book have had precursors. There was the World Social Forum, a movement which gave us the slogan, "Another world is possible." Vandana Shiva and Maud Barlow have written about the corporate theft of the world's water. P. Saila writes with scathing sarcasm every week about the dualism between the rich and the poor, between the powerful and the voiceless, between the corporates and the small farmers, and about the hijacking of policy making by the robber barons. Some years ago, there was an independent people's tribunal on the World Bank in India, which eventually resulted in a book titled "The World Bank in India: Undermining Sovereignty, Distorting Development," published by Orient Black Swan in 2010. Thus, the book now under discussion has kind of distinguished ancestry. However, it is more comprehensive, more wide-ranging, more compelling than anything that has appeared so far. Subject to correction by the authors, I draw the following conclusions from the book. The autonomous and cancerous growth of the world of finance must be brought under strict control. The power of the corporates over state and society must be nullified. Humanity must get off the treadmill of growth. We must learn to respect our habitat, namely planet Earth, and develop a new, healthy, or at least non-pathological relationship with nature. And ecological sustainability must be combined with equity and social justice. Now, that is not a complete or anything like a complete summary of what the book says. There are many other themes and sub-themes in the book. To mention only three of them, it stresses the importance of taking note of traditional knowledge, practices, and coping strategies. It draws attention to the deracination of the rich and super rich in this country. They are feeling an affinity with the rich of the world, and they have lost a sense of common humanity with the less affluent and the poor in their own country. And it distinguishes the globalization of the corporates from true globalization in the sense of the solidarity of the peoples of the world and the interplay of cultures. In a panel discussion, a panelist is generally expected to stimulate discussion by voicing a few criticisms and stating some points of disagreement. My difficulty is that I find hardly anything in the book to dissent with. May I, however, venture to make a point that may possibly go a bit beyond the intentions of the authors. When in 1970s, Mehboob ul Haq first said that growth was not enough, it was a landmark statement indicative of a major shift in thinking. We now need another major shift and one more landmark statement. Perhaps to the effect that growth is not only not enough, but is in fact questionable. That it is a fatal delusion. That its pursuit is a spell from which we must free ourselves. And that our goal should be not a breathlessly galloping society driven by greed and ambition, torn by ill will and conflict, and destroying its own habitat and therefore itself, but a just, humane, caring, conflict-free society, content with modest prosperity, at peace internally and externally, with a sense of responsibility towards future generations as well as other forms of life, and in harmony with nature and planet Earth. I have been saying this for some time, but with great diffidence, because it seems such an oddball view. After this book, I can say it with greater confidence. I am grateful to the authors for giving me this confidence. I find the book overwhelmingly persuasive, in fact definitive. It is closely argued, solidly substantiated. But what is even more important, is that it is driven by deep concern and anguish. It offers an ecological, humane, moral vision for the future. While there is much indignation in the book, there is no shrillness of tone. It is a wise book, and the voice that speaks to, I should say voices that speak to us, from its pages are voices of sanity. Let me stick my neck out and say quite simply and without hedging my bets that it is one of the most important books I have ever read. It ought to become a classic. It ought to be enormously influential and should bring about decisive change. But will it? I wonder. Another world may be possible, but it will not come into being on its own. Those who believe in the possibility will have to work hard to make it a reality. It will not be easy. Change will be fought hard, not only by those who benefit by the existing dispensation, but also by well-meaning, sophisticated, learned persons who subscribe to the prevailing religion of development and growth, cannot even imagine that there can be an alternative to it, and are bound to be dismayed and disoriented by any questioning of that religion. Advocacy of change will be condemned as anti-development. Any suggestion that growth should not be our objective will be received with incomprehension and anger. To repeat, it will not be easy to bring about change, but the effort is necessary and urgent. I regard this book as a powerful manifesto for such a campaign for change. Thank you.